At the end of my last video talking about the previously untranslated hidden gem by From Software, Shadow Tower Abyss, I mentioned two games that seem to have struck a similar vibe to that one. One of them was Lunacid, a game which at the time was still in early access, and the store page outright mentions Kingsfield and Shadow Tower as inspiration. Now that I have played through the full release to completion, getting all of the endings and nearly 100%ing the game outside of the few weapon drops I do not have the patience to grind for, I'd like to share my thoughts and feelings on the game. Initially, I had planned to open this by saying that while I do like it and plan to still recommend you buy it and play it for yourself, I also may have put too much hype on it and my expectations were a little too high and unfair to the point an indie game possibly made by one person could never live up to. In hindsight, it definitely was not a good idea for me to put so much hope on Lunacid to make me feel the same way that Shadow Tower Abyss did, a game that is now in contention for my favorite release by From Software. I made a tweet after getting the first ending with the overall experience having me kinda deflated. But since putting more time into it, the game has only grown more and more with adoration in my mind. The biggest reason I initially felt this way was three major points of contention with Lunacid and its design. When I play a game, especially one that I plan to make a video on, I try not to follow guides unless absolutely necessary because it alters my experience with the game, which in turn will alter my perspective, my perception, and most importantly, my review. If I know what to do, that completely circumvents the learning process that may or may not be in the game, which is something worth analyzing. For Lunacid, too much of it felt like I needed to have a guide to actually ascertain what I was supposed to do and where I was supposed to go. I fully acknowledge that this is very much a me issue. I always struggle with direction in games that have areas that look way too similar, like Monstro and Kingdom Hearts 1. I just wish that the game either had an in-game map or some of the areas had hallways distinct enough that I wouldn't constantly get confused at which one I was in because they all look the same. Don't take that as a knock against the visual design of the locations themselves, because that is one of the biggest strengths of this game, but places like the Temple of Earth, the Catacombs, the cave system underneath the forest, and the entire Fetid Mire all required me at points to pull up a fan-made map because I could not get my bearings in any of these areas. The next point kind of goes hand in hand with the last one, and that is the sense of progression and accomplishment in any given area. Lunacid is outright asking for comparisons to From Software's old games, no matter how unfair that may seem, but unlike a lot of those From Software games, it never felt clear as to what I had to do or what to do next once I accomplished a task. For example, in the Accursed Tomb, you are told to light the 3 fires of Prometheus. After bumbling my way through and eventually leveling my dex high enough so I could jump to the ledge and reach it because I was too stupid to figure out that I could stack coffins on top of each other using the coffin spawning spell, I turned on all 3 fires, and then all I could think was, cool, now what do I do? In Shadow Tower Abyss, by comparison, it always felt like you fully cleared out an area and exhausted all there was to do, because at the end you were either unlocking a new area, being given a unique item/weapon, or made to kill a boss. Outside of one instance, I never felt like I was completing a location or made any real progress in Lunacid. I would simply bumble my way around and eventually find my way to a new area, and couldn't stop thinking to myself about if I saw everything in the last one. The only time it really nails that feeling of progression is with the castle, because you need to get these different colored medallions to open different wings of the building and ascend to the top to fight a boss. But even that isn't 100% because, like I said earlier, where I don't know how you are supposed to figure out things without a guide. To open the castle without picking Vampire as your starting class, you need to go into the Cattle Dungeon and pick up the white key. And to open the door to said Cattle Dungeon, which has these red diamonds on them next to a podium, you would think that you need to have some sort of item, maybe a key to insert into the podium. That's what I thought as I roamed around the maps for hours trying to find an item that would fit this description. In reality, what you're supposed to do is cast one of the blood spells near it so the blood will fall into the podium and open the door. In the game's defense, maybe I missed something that would spell this out to me, but I do not know how you are supposed to think that this is the solution without looking it up because I was completely stumped. This had me feeling the same frustration as when I play a puzzle game or a point-and-click adventure game that I can't internalize the logic for. I can tell they clearly want me to do something and that there is obviously some sort of solution right in front of my face, but I just don't know what to do and feel incredibly stupid because I need to look at a guide instead of figuring it out for myself naturally. Though I would be remiss to not mention that the game does this well in other places. There are a few instances where it does reward the attentive player.
So are you like a Toho reference or a Patches reference? Oh, nope, that's Patches.
For example, one of the side quests you can get is trying to remove the armor from this dead body. No matter what you do, it seems that this body and the armor is completely impervious to all of your attacks and magic, except one of your spells says that it ignores all resistances. So you cast what is normally a very weak and useless fire spell and light the body on fire until it burns to ash, allowing you to pick up the armor and take it to the shopkeeper, which then allows you to buy new gear from the store. The last big point of contention is sadly the combat. It might be my least favorite aspect of this game, which is pretty alarming when a massive chunk of it is combat. For the attentive viewer, you will have already noticed how the combat is similar, or just like Kingsfield, where you have this bar in the top right corner which shows you charging your weapon's attack. When the meter is filled and glowing, your attack will deal the most amount of damage. There is also weak spots and dismemberment systems similar to Shadow Tower Abyss, but the hit feedback feels lacking. Your damage often feels insignificant no matter how many points you dump into your stats and try to match weapons to what you are fighting. This in turn makes boss fights some of the worst parts of this game because combat feels so lacking and shallow, as you are forced into having Skyrim tier combat watching health bars slowly chip down. For the first few hours, I felt like I was tickling enemies until I found the Vampire Hunter D sword, where I was finally killing enemies in 3 to 4 hits. Even in post-game where I had the final boss killing weapon, I was still taking longer than I felt I should be to cut down basic enemies. I think combat could feel a lot better with small changes to the feedback to sell the illusion and satisfactory of fighting enemies. Maybe add a little more screen shake on fully charged hits, add some hit stop when your weapons pass through enemies instead of super fast animations like they are now, possibly make enemies stagger more, add some more diverse sound effects for hitting different enemies and using different weapons. While overall the sound effects present in the game are great, there are a few combat related ones that do not sound nearly as impactful as they should be. This in turn makes unique weapons and strong charge attacks not be nearly as impactful, memorable, or stand out as much as they should be. At its core, the combat is fine, but I think pursuing these things could possibly make it a lot more satisfying without having to outright change systems. As it is now, the combat became the most enjoyable when I got the Blessed Wind Sword, and I was able to just spam left click until health bars melted. The last thing I really hope gets fixed in a future update is the menus. Menuing on its own is really annoying once you start getting a lot of items that you have to scroll through. There are a few quality of life features that would be great, like being able to select one of the 5 item slots that has an item in it and swapping it to another. As it is now, if you select slot 1, then try to put the item that is in slot 2 in it, it will leave slot 2 empty instead of swapping item slot 1 and item slot 2. Also, please make it so it stops scrolling to the top of the item list anytime you open any of the tabs. I cannot articulate how much of a grinding halt the gameplay is brought to because you have to keep fiddling and scrolling through these menus anytime you want to change things around. Possibly the menus can be reformatted into grids or some other format that isn't this long list that endlessly scrolls. I really hope they fix how unresponsive these menus can be, like how sometimes it just does not equip the item you have selected and either leaves it as what it was originally or changes it to something else entirely when it wasn't even selected. This is so frustrating because the game does not pause when you open the menu, so fast menuing can't even be reliable because sometimes it just doesn't do its job correctly, which results in you getting killed. We've spent enough time going over the negatives, let's take a deeper look at the positives and the biggest selling points of this game, which are its world design, music, and atmosphere. The soundtrack and ambience is stellar throughout this entire game. It just plays banger after banger its entire runtime. My personal favorite track is probably Dead Department when you are in the Forbidden Archives, running down the hallways fighting the Chimeras. A few of the final areas of the game have this really tense and oppressive droning. It really sells the atmosphere. It makes all these areas super creepy. The amount of variety in each location is something that should be celebrated. More games need to be like Lunacid and have a wealth of locations that are complete departures from one another. The visuals perfectly nail the late PS1, early PS2 graphics. Places like the Fetid Mire look like they could be mistaken for a screenshot from a Kingsfield game that you never played. These locations were activating my neurons and getting me pumped as if I was playing an old game I had never heard of. A feeling that I only really have when I'm doing stuff for my obscure PS2 action game series. And while I did complain about being unable to get my bearings in the levels during my playthrough because of how so many hallways look the same, there was a level of design language that I did pick up on when playing that made exploration really satisfying. After a while, I started to notice the pattern that certain rooms that you unlock that either had lackluster rewards to them or no rewards at all usually contained a hidden door to a much better item. And even beyond that, I started to notice how these were even bait hidden walls, and the true secrets were behind a hidden wall within the hidden wall. Once I figured this out and started to consistently find things for myself without a guide, it only made the exploration all the more addicting and rewarding. While the combat is a bit underwhelming, the actual weapons themselves feature a wide variety of interesting choices and neat ideas. I enjoyed leveling the weapons up to see how they would evolve and change. The one weapon that you can alternate between being a sword or a shield was a super cool idea. The same can be said for the spells, as there are a ton of different ones that cater to multiple playstyles. I have no clue how I would have beat the final boss without this one fire spell that ignores resistances. Just don't make the same mistake I did and start machine gun spamming the blood missile spell, or else you're going to wring yourself dry, ending up looking like this alien and giving yourself a game over, possibly losing a ton of progress. The enemies you fight between areas is also super unique, so seeing what weird oddities can be encountered coupled with the unique weapons that can be found in these weird and decaying areas made exploration all the more enticing and prevented it from ever getting old. Even if the drop rates for a few of the weapons and spells were way too low for my liking, the act of collecting/hunting them down was incredibly fun and might be my favorite part of this game outside of the next positive. The thing that Lunacid always delivered on was its presentation. There aren't many cutscenes in this game, but when they do show up, they are always some of the coolest stuff in the game. From interesting shot compositions to super striking visuals. I don't know how to describe it, but there is something about the visual effects they use on some of the pre-rendered cutscenes and IRL footage that just tickles my brain. It's the same stuff that makes me find even the most basic and shitty analog horror YouTube videos aesthetically pleasing and at the very least worth skimming through. What really made me appreciate this game more was when I finally did let go of not looking at guides and going to get the other two possible endings. This doesn't negate what I said about how the hell are you supposed to figure some of this stuff out without looking at a guide, like having to get part of the sword you need to craft to kill the Grim Reaper is left in the hands of this dead NPC and only shows up in their hands when it is a real-life full moon, so you need to adjust your system clock to one of those dates. If you know me, then it should be expected that I'm going to love an ending that is a reference to Drakengard's ending E. It is leagues more forgiving and doesn't kill you in one hit though. It also gave me one final laugh that I named my character Circumcise. Lunacid is an ambitious little game that even when it stumbles, it still shines. Yeah, I did get frustrated with it a lot. Yeah, I went in with expectations way too high that it was unfair and could never realistically live up to, but I am glad I actually sat down and put all the time I did into playing it because in spite of all of its issues, I had a blast with it. The game manages to capture that old From Software vibe that isn't easy to replicate. If you are willing to deal with some jank and the likelihood that you'll need to consult a guide, then I highly recommend checking this out, especially if you love Kingsfield and Shadow Tower Abyss. People asked me in the comments of my Shadow Tower Abyss video, and I expect some to ask me again in this video's comments, if I'm going to cover Hungry Ghosts. I've had a video planned for that game for over a year now. I've been holding off on doing it in hopes that someone would make an English patch for the game, but I fear that may never happen, and I should actually just get around to playing it and making a video on it. So expect that at some point. If you've made it this far into the video, I just want to say thank you for watching as always. If you really like the video and the channel, then please pass it around and maybe consider becoming a patron on Patreon. All patrons get access to videos a day early, along with a $7 tier that allows you to view rough cuts of upcoming videos. I'm also going to be introducing a new tier for $3 and up that allows people to vote on upcoming multi-game reviews. I'm now going to shout out all of my $5 and up patrons who really help support the channel: Bully, Applejuice426, Dencha, Turbo Chicken, Scary Dinosaur, Burley, Elliot Morton, Jordan Bennett, Kevin Velasquez, Lotto, Medi Not the Bad Guy, Quanner, Quartz, Samuel Egan, Sayan Heggy, Sir Newt Newt, Slemph Tingle, Cosmonaut Cola, Ben Johnson, Buckets, Chichometrius, Cursed Void, Ekphraso, Filthy Finger 69, Fishkami, Hardleg Joe, Lazy Titan, Leon, Nicholas Pedinato, Shisaji, Starcasters, and Mitchell. Thanks so much, guys. As for what's coming out next, I'm working on my Drakengard retrospective. I'm trying to get a Christmas video out, but that may miss its mark. I'm working on a Like a Dragon Gaiden review. I still have my boxing anime video that I'm slowly chipping away on. If you're interested in that, you could watch the Ashita no Joe segment of that on my Patreon for $7 or more. If you're a card game player of any kind, I have a TCG Player affiliate link in the description below. All purchases you make will give me a small kickback. I also have a NordVPN affiliate link in the description below, which will give you a discount on a 2-year plan. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this smaller video just to keep you busy while I work on much larger things, and see you next time.